and there are challenges for even local Palestinians to even get there because of blockades and maybe
checkpoints. Yeah.
unnecessary stopping of people to get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Wow.
It's really hard because you see armed guards everywhere with loaded guns,
Does that impact your experience when you've made a holy trip
Well,
to
it's
Masjid
heartbreaking,
Al-Aqsa?
isn't it? Because you can clearly tell that there's an occupying force there that ought not to be there. People who have got nothing, they're just going about their daily lives, but they're just surrounded by armed guards in uniform everywhere. And any little things happens, and they know that there's going to be real issues. So wherever you go, you can't escape it. So it's very, very difficult. I mean, I spoke to some people and they say, look, my son's been in prison. My husband, he was a guard in Masjid Al-Aqsa. My father was a guard and he was shot. He was martyred. My son's in prison. My other son's been in prison. And sometimes they almost see it as a badge of honor because in terms of they stood up for the cause, for that fight for freedom. And if they suffer as a result of that, although it's tremendously difficult, they see it as rewarding for them, isn't it? But yeah, so that's the thing. Yeah,
That's interesting.
yeah.
You've talked about the economic side. What about, I guess, maybe not on the West Bank, I don't know. Is there issues with safety, with health, with food poverty? Is that an issue there?
Yeah, I mean, all over. I mean, because ultimately the borders are controlled. What goes in and out is controlled. The success of the community is all under occupying forces, isn't it? There are some places which are doing better than others. I mean, when we went to Nablus, although there is a lot of hostility and a lot of fighting that goes on there. Some parts there were some commercial parts. So, but even then, it's difficult for them. In and around the old city of Jerusalem, there's a lot of poverty. Although there is food there. It's not like you can't access food. There is, but prices are very expensive.
Is it expensive or is it actually because in the area there are Jewish communities there as well as Palestinian communities. I'm going to ask frankly, would you say it's a way of taxing? Are Palestinian people poorer? And if they are, when you talk about pricing being different and law being different or more challenging, is that actually, do you feel, a way of oppressing the people or like taxing them out of getting opportunities?
I mean, in the old city of Jerusalem, it has different quarters. Okay. So you have the Muslim quarter, you have the Jewish quarter, you have the Christian quarter, and you have the Armenian quarter, if I'm not mistaken. And you can walk through all of them. Mm-hmm. That's not an issue because it's all within the old city. But if you go in the Muslim quarter, you'll notice the quality of the street, the old streets, the quality of the shops, i.e. their cleanliness, all of that kind of thing. You'll notice it, however it is, as beautiful as it is. Then if you go to some of the other quarters, then you see how the shops improve, they're cleaner, they have bigger shops, they have nicer environments. And then you think to yourself, well, that's clearly an indication of where, things are there, isn't it? There's no quality at all in terms of opportunities. So yeah, there's no real opportunity for people living there. And sometimes what happens is, we heard from local people that they get offered millions of pounds to leave their homes, if they're not bulldozed, that is. But people in the old city who are really close to the masjid, they get offered millions of dollars to leave their homes. And so that aspect is there as well, the pressure to leave. Because that's the whole point, isn't it? If you turn the screw tight enough or you put enough pressure, people think, this is not worth it, would rather leave. Because living in that circumstance for in excess of 50 years, you have to ask yourself, where is this leading? And less people are going there now. And when you speak to people in Palestine, all they want people to come. That's all they say. Just make sure you come. We want you to come and see, be with us, support us. That's their main thing. And it's really unfortunate where obviously circumstances now don't allow for people to travel by and large, because it is a lot more hostile now.
Yeah.
But when they're sitting there, they're under oppression. They have economic sanctions. Freedom of movement is also restricted. Life can change, um, instantaneously. People can be put in prison. Your jobs, you have no job security. You have no finances, and people still have to pay very, very high rents as well. So people who live outside, if they don't own their home, they have to pay rent. Sometimes the rents are just like the UK prices. And how do you do that if you don't have a job?
Exactly.
Yeah, so it's a very, very difficult scenario for them. And sometimes we spoke to a few people who said, look, young people like our children, they're moving out. They're moving out to other countries because even though the older community have that really strong faith, and they've always been there and they've always stood by their cause for freedom, young people have social media now. And so then they think to themselves, well, is this the life that I want? I can go out and help other ways. So there's that challenge as well.
But in the region, Muslims and Jewish people and Christians, they've existed there for a long period of time, not just in the old city, but across the whole of the West Bank. So, and I don't know if I'm mistaken, but they had peacefully lived with each other for a period of time. I guess, could you talk about that transition? Why has it now become a bit more hostile? Or
well, I mean, it goes back to the time of Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu. He liberated Jerusalem and Palestine without any blood shed or anything. And so he came with one companion, and the keys to the city were handed over to him. And so, but there's a few masjids in and around Palestine or in Jerusalem, which are called Masjid Umar. And they're named that because Sayyidina Umar prayed in those masjids, or prayed in that area, which later became masjids. But a couple of them are next to churches, because he was invited to pray in the churches, but he said, no, I don't want to pray in churches, because if I pray in the churches, people turn them into masjids. So he said, I'll pray next to the church, so thereby I'm not praying inside, but then the place of Muslim prayer can be next to. And that's what happened. So the point is, and in one of the masjids, there's a charter. There's a famous letter written by Sayyidina Umar that saying that everyone can live in peace, nothing will be taken from you, anybody who wants to go can go, anybody who can stay, and there'll be no harm to anyone. To paraphrase, it's available online. It's the Treaty of Umar, it's called, in Jerusalem. And so that's how it always was for many, many hundreds of years. And even after the time of Salahuddin al-Ayyubi rahmatullah alayhi, when he liberated Jerusalem again, then there was peace. There was peace for many, many years. It's only very recently when, after the Balfour Declaration and the Jews started moving over there, and then the Zionist project started, that's when it all became a bit very hostile.
Do you see this conflict, this war, a religious war, or do you think as the main predominant factor, or do you see it as other issues, whether that's social or geographic,
well, I think
political? How much does religion play in this conflict?
I think there's, of course, a religious aspect to it, because that area is sacred in Islam. But Christians and Jews also have a claim to that in their own scriptures, and it's unique in that all prophets, the majority of prophets, spent time in and around Palestine and Jerusalem area, and so it does have a historic relevance to all Abrahamic faiths. There's no doubt about that, and so there is that element to it. And even in Islam, the future is also there, and it's the fact that the whole world is focused on a tiny piece of the globe is fascinating in and of itself. It's not even so tiny in the grand scale of the world, but everybody's focused on that. That tells you how important it is in the grand scheme of things. But I think we can't be naive to suggest that all of those people who are claim right to that land and occupying that land and things like that is just based on religion. It's just a religious right. I mean, in the 21st century, religion is not the overarching consideration that most people have, and most governments. they're not religiously minded. They're secular minded, aren't they? They're what's in their financial interest, what's in their interest regards to power, geopolitics, influence in the region. Everybody just wants to cement their own legacies, isn't it? From a governmental point of view, they might use religion as an excuse to say, well, we have a right under religious scriptures to the land, but that's not the motivation. I mean, I don't think that's
why
case.
I asked, because from my understanding, they have.
I'm talking about the occupying powers.
Yes.
I wouldn't say their genuine reasons are not religious. I mean, because the ultra orthodox community, they're against it as well, aren't they?
So from your conversations with people on the ground, with Palestinians, do they see it as a religious debate between let's say the formation of Israel, or just Israelis, and who has the right to which part of land? Do they see as a religious divide, and that's why?
Yeah, Palestinians do. I mean, from the Palestinian point of view, it's very much the religious side, which is the overarching consideration.
Yeah.
And look, the fact of the matter is they've been there for centuries and generations.
But haven't Christians and Jewish people been there for?
They've coexisted. The point is that they've lived there and been in charge of those lands for generations without any issue to any minority. But to now all of a sudden have an occupying force take over their land, bulldoze their communities, set up refugee camps, and basically disarm them, not give them human rights, and total set up an apartheid. That's not tolerable, is it?
You're saying that because before it was actually, was it UN occupied, or was considered this, it wasn't part of a particular nation aspects of the West Bank? Is that what you're saying too? And now there's an occupying force?
Yeah, I mean, even when you go to the West Bank, you can see the new settlements on Palestinian land. You can literally see on the higher parts of the land, let's say it's very mountainous, very, very beautiful, and you can see on the mountainous parts where you have all the new build houses of the illegal settlements, and they're illegal under international law, aren't they? So that was not there before, and it's more and more common. So that's not a disputed fact of law or matter, to in all honesty.
What are the main worries of Palestinians on the ground? I ask as a question because I want to kind of wash away the debate, or what we hear from Piers Morgan when he's shouting at people on his show. What do those Palestinians on the ground, what do they want? What does they see as the priority in a solution?
They want freedom, and they want freedom. They want equal opportunities. They want their land that has been taken from them, for those who have been evicted from their homes, those whose homes have been bulldozed, those people whose family have been locked up without charge, and they just want freedom. Then their demands are not extensive, they're not unreasonable. I mean, anybody in that scenario would want the same thing, wouldn't they? And they want the chance to build lives for themselves, and they, for sure, their priority is to protect Mosque Al-Aqsa. That's one of the main priorities. Doesn't matter what happens, they want to protect Mosque Al-Aqsa, and that must remain in Muslim hands.
Do you think there's a threat to that?
I think there is a threat to that in the long term. Well, I say long term, maybe not so long term. There's definitely a lobby, and there are groups who are lobbying and pushing for the establishment of a temple mount on the Mosque Al-Aqsa, the grounds there. It's becoming difficult now. Like, for example, when I first went there, and this is an agreed status quo. The status quo is that only Muslims can pray in Mosque Al-Aqsa, in the grounds of Mosque Al-Aqsa. And I think when we first went there were no settlers, or there was nobody of any other faith that was in the compound. But over times that we've been there, it's becoming more and more common that you see settlers coming in with armed guard, having a tour, offering some of the prayers at certain times of the day. And, when it's not so busy, for example, mid-morning or something, outside of the Muslim prayer times. That never used to happen before. So for sure, there's a push towards desensitizing the presence of other religions people of other religions within the Masjid Al-Aqsa, because you can't just change it overnight, can you? You have to soften it. That's why the softening is there. People are going in now more regularly, and so the Muslims there, they can't do anything about it, and they're just becoming a bit more accustomed to it. So I think there will be a push towards more Jewish control over Masjid Al-Aqsa. There's no doubt about that. That's what it's all about, isn't it?
Of course. Do you think we will ever see peace in the region, peace in Gaza, or peace in the West Strip?
I think war can't carry on indefinitely. I think there will be temporary peace eventually when this current conflict ends, however it ends, whether for better or for worse. You can't keep fighting. I mean, eventually Gaza's, if it's flattened anyway, there's nobody left to fight. So there will be peace. I'm hopefully sooner rather than later. But it will be temporary until next time, unfortunately, because you can't keep occupying people, expecting them to never try to secure their own freedom. Eventually there will be tipping points, and there will be conflicts ongoing. I think from a theological perspective, it's when Imam Mahdi will return that will then trigger the true liberation and freedom of Palestine.
From speaking to Palestinians, do you feel they want a two-state solution or a one-state solution? What do they see as a genuine, reasonable resolution?
I've never really asked the question directly, because when someone is saying, look, they don't have the immediate necessities in life, and they don't have freedom of movement, they don't have jobs, they don't have opportunities, then to talk to them about, global political solutions, answers. It doesn't make any sense to them. I mean, they're concerned about protecting the masjid, surviving day by day, and making ends meet for their family. That's what they're interested in. So I've never really asked the question directly. But I think, look, ultimately, anybody who lives there, my view would be, and I guess it's implied in their discussions that we have had, is, look, lands which have been occupied must not be occupied anymore. And I think it's really as simple as that. Whether that means go back to, the 1967 borders under the UN resolution, I think that has to be a starting point.
Mm-hmm. And another question I wanted to ask is, do you feel, I don't know, have you seen it? Is there a humanitarian crisis happening in Gaza, happening in the West Bank? Do you feel that actually is happening?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's well documented. It's all over the news. It's recognized by the UN. All of the charitable international charities have mentioned it. So I don't think that's in any doubt whatsoever. I mean, anybody who looks at, Google Maps or any kind of report by any reputable third party will acknowledge and accept the fact that there is a humanitarian crisis there. I mean, international journalists aren't allowed in. What does that say? Trucks have not been allowed in, food's not been allowed in. The government as well has confirmed, or they did confirm right at the outset, that blocking food, water, electricity, all these things are justified. And we've heard numerous accounts of that. So I mean, we've never been able to go into Gaza, but in the West Bank as well, there are people. I mean, they are struggling. I mean, settlers now are becoming emboldened by the right-wing government, and so they are being more and more aggressive, more now than ever. And when one side has all the arms, all the ammunition, all the army, then it's a very, very dire situation.
Thank you for sharing those experiences. There's been a lot of debate about this, and we were discussing before, what do we want to talk about? And I think your insight, because you have been to Palestine, the West Strip, also been to Syria, Damascus as well, it just gives a bit of insight rather than hearing the fiery debate, but just understanding a perspective. And all our prayers do go to Palestinians or anyone in the Middle East who are being impacted, whether that's family, finances, health. Our prayers go to those people.